What happens when the man who crushed your dreams comes back to mock your new humble life? He thought he had won. He thought he had left her with nothing but broken ambitions and a tiny walk-up apartment. He'd laugh, tell his friends how she'd failed without him, and sleep soundly in his king-sized bed. But he made one critical mistake. He never understood the woman he married, and he had no idea that while he was laughing at her front door, she was holding the keys to a world he could only dream of, a world bought with the love of a man who saw the queen inside the ashes. This is the story of how a single visit, meant to be a final act of mockery, became a spectacular moment of karmic justice. The old floorboards of the fourth-floor walk-up on Bleecker Street groaned under the weight of Mark Sterling's $1,200 Italian loafers. His eyes, the color of cold steel, did a slow, deliberate sweep of the room. It was an inventory of failure, and he was savoring every item. The second-hand velvet couch, the mismatched coffee mugs on a shelf, the faint smell of turpentine and oil paints that he'd always despised. He called it the scent of poverty. "Well, Mamia," he said, his voice a smooth, condescending purr that she remembered from 1,000 tiny arguments. "This is cozy." He let the word hang in the air, waited with pity. Mamia Vance watched him from the small kitchenette, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. She didn't offer him a drink. She kept her expression placid, a calm sea over a raging storm. 6 months. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, a year since he'd packed his designer suitcases and left their sprawling Upper East Side townhouse, declaring her art career a delusional hobby, and her refusal to be a docile corporate wife an unforgivable betrayal. "It's a studio, Mark." "It's what I need," she replied, her voice even. He chuckled, a short, sharp sound that was all judgment. "Right. Your art." He gestured vaguely toward a large canvas covered with a white sheet. "Still chasing that pipe dream, I see. I thought you'd have come to your senses by now, gotten a real job. Maybe something in PR. You were always good at planning my parties." Every word was a carefully sharpened dart aimed at an old wound. In their 10 years of marriage, Mark had systematically dismantled her confidence. Her paintings, which had once won her a scholarship to RISD, were relegated to the attic. Her artist friends were deemed unsuitable company. Her dream of opening a small gallery was mocked as a vanity project for the bored and talentless. He had wanted a trophy, a hostess, an accessory. He had not wanted a partner. "I'm happy here," she said, and the simple truth of it seemed to annoy him. "Happy?" he scoffed, walking over to the window that looked out onto a brick wall and a fire escape. "Come on, Mamia. Don't lie to yourself. You were never good at it. You're happy with this, after what you had. Remember the view from the townhouse, all of Central Park, at your feet." "I remember the view, Mark. I also remember feeling like I was in a cage, even with all that space." He turned his face a mask of faux concern. The reason for his visit, he'd claimed, was to drop off some old financial documents she needed to sign a final lingering tie from their shared life. But the documents were in a slim manila envelope on her counter, and he'd made no move to leave after she'd signed them. He was here to gloat. He was here to confirm his own narrative that she was nothing without him. His new girlfriend, a 25-year-old Instagram model named Tiffany, was probably waiting in his new black Porsche downstairs, scrolling through her phone, blissfully unaware of the psychological warfare being waged 4 floors above. Mark had made sure Mamia knew all about her, posting a relentless stream of photos from Monaco, St. Bart's, and Dubai. Look what you gave up, the post screamed. Look how much better my life is now. A cage, he repeated, shaking his head. A gilded cage. Darling, most women would kill for it. Designer clothes, charity galas, a name that meant something. Now you have this. He gestured again, a theatrical sweep of his arm. The noble suffering artist. It's a bit of a cliché, don't you think? Mamia's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw her mug against the wall and tell him to get out. She wanted to list his every cruelty, his every infidelity, the way he'd made her feel so small she could barely breathe. But she didn't. She simply took a slow sip of her tea. Mark took her silence as surrender. A smug, triumphant smile played on his lips. Look, I know things must be tight. If you need a little something to tide you over, I could help. Think of it as severance pay. He reached for his wallet, the ultimate act of condescension. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen. JC Architect just confirmed the skylight installation for the master studio. It's going to be incredible. Can't wait to see the look on your face. Home soon. A genuine smile, small and secret, touched Mamia's lips. She looked back at Mark, at his offered charity, at his pitying gaze. The urge to scream was gone, replaced by a profound, almost serene sense of irony. No thank you, Mark, she said, her voice clear and firm. I'm doing just fine. He shrugged, pocketing his wallet, looking almost disappointed that she wouldn't take the bait. All right, suit yourself. Don't say I didn't offer. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Good luck with your cozy little life, Mamia. Truly. He closed the door behind him, and the sound of his expensive shoes descending the creaky stairs was the sound of her past, finally fading away. Mamia stood alone in the quiet of her studio. She looked around at the space Mark had found so pathetic. This wasn't her home. It was her sanctuary, her workshop, the temporary space she'd rented to finish the largest commission of her career. The commission that had changed everything. She walked over to the covered canvas, the one he had dismissed so easily. With a steady hand, she pulled back the sheet. On the easel was a massive, vibrant, abstract painting, a whirlwind of deep blues, fiery oranges, and brilliant gold leaf. It was a piece about rebirth, about finding light in the darkness. It was the first of 12 pieces commissioned by the Croft Foundation for the lobby of their new global headquarters. She picked up her phone and typed a reply to JC. Mamia, can't wait. The view from our window will be much better than a brick wall. She hit send, a feeling of delicious anticipation bubbling up inside her. Mark thought he was looking at her final chapter. He had no idea he was only in the preface of her new life. A life that didn't just include a new love, but a penthouse at the top of the Orion Tower, a building that Mark's own real estate firm had lost the bid on 6 months ago. The irony was so thick she could almost taste it. It hadn't always been a battlefield of condescension and quiet rage. Mamia remembered the beginning a decade ago when Mark Sterling was a whirlwind of charm and ambition. He was a junior associate at a prestigious real estate firm, and she was a promising young artist fresh out of school, her portfolio buzzing with raw talent. They met at a gallery opening in Chelsea. He'd ignored the art and focused entirely on her, captivated, he'd said, by her passion. You talk about color the way I talk about closing deals, he'd whispered to her over champagne, with absolute certainty. He pursued her relentlessly. He bought one of her smaller paintings, a moody landscape of the Rhode Island coast, and hung it in his bachelor pad. It was the only piece of her art he would ever purchase. In the intoxicating blur of new love, she mistook his intensity for devotion. His ambition felt like a thrilling ride she wanted to be on. When he proposed a year later, with a diamond so large it felt ostentatious, she said yes, believing they were building an empire together, his in commerce, hers in creativity. The illusion began to crack almost immediately after the wedding. Their new home, a magnificent pre-war townhouse on the Upper East Side, was his choice. "It's an investment, Mamia. It projects success," he'd explained, waving away her suggestion of a spacious loft in Tribeca, where she could have a real studio. The attic was designated as her art space. It was poorly lit, and either freezing in the winter or suffocating in the summer. When she tried to set up a proper studio, Mark complained about the smell of the paints. "Can't we have clients over with the house smelling like a chemical factory?" he'd ask, his tone leaving no room for debate. Her easel was soon folded away. Her art became the hobby. It was a term he introduced slowly, insidiously. "How's the hobby going?" he'd ask on his way out the door, not waiting for an answer. "You should take a break from your hobby and come to the club with me," he'd suggest, framing it as a treat. The friends who had been her creative lifeline were systematically pruned from their social circle. He found them wanting. Her best friend, a sculptor named Chloe, was dismissed as crass. A mentor from RISD, a celebrated painter, was labeled a has-been. They were replaced by Mark's world other finance guys with slicked-back hair and their wives, women who discussed charity committees and vacation spots with a competitive fervor. Mamia found herself performing the role of Mrs. Sterling. She hosted flawless dinner parties, her name appeared on the right charity boards, and she dressed in the elegant, muted colors Mark preferred. She was drowning, and the water was made of silk and diamonds. The cage was indeed gilded, but its bars were cold and unyielding. The arguments started small. He'd forget to tell her about a business dinner until an hour before expecting her to be ready and smiling. He'd criticize her opinions on politics or art in front of his friends, laughing it off as her artistic temperament. The biggest fight, the one that marked the beginning of the end, was about a gallery. An old friend from college had opened a small, independent space in the East Village and offered Mamia a solo show. It was the opportunity she had been dreaming of, a chance to reclaim her identity. She was ecstatic, working secretly in the attic at all hours, pouring years of pent-up frustration and hope onto canvases. When she finally told Mark, 2 months before the opening, he didn't even look up from his tablet. An art show in the East Village, he'd said, the distaste clear in his voice. "Mamia, my clients live on Park Avenue, not St. Mark's Place. What will people think? I don't care what they think. This is for me, Mark. This is who I am." He finally looked at her, his expression cold. "Who you are is my wife, and my wife does not have a little art show in some dingy downtown gallery as if we're struggling. It's embarrassing. Cancel it." No. It was the first time she had ever given him a flat refusal on something so important. "What did you say?" I said. "No. I'm doing the show." The fury in his eyes was terrifying. He stood up, his 6-foot frame towering over her. "You are throwing away everything I've built for us. Your little paintings are a liability. Your selfishness is going to damage my reputation." "Your reputation," she'd fired back, her own voice rising. "What about my life? My dreams, the ones you've slowly suffocated for a decade? This isn't about your reputation, Mark. It's about your control. You can't stand the thought of me having something that is mine, something you can't put a price tag on or use to impress your friends." He didn't yell. He did something far worse. He laughed. It was the same hollow, dismissive laugh she'd heard in her Bleecker Street studio. "My God, you're delusional," he said, shaking his head. "You actually think you're some kind of great, undiscovered artist. You're a housewife with a hobby, Mamia. Without me, what are you? You'd be living in a dump, just like that gallery you're so excited about." That was the moment the love died. It wasn't a slow fade. It was a sudden, violent death, leaving an empty void where her heart used to be. She saw him clearly for the first time, a deeply insecure man whose entire identity was built on external validation, money status, and a beautiful, compliant wife. Her independence wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a threat to his very existence. She went ahead with the show. Mark did not attend. His absence was a statement, and everyone in their circle noticed. The show was a modest success. She sold a few pieces, received a positive mention in a local art blog, and more importantly, felt the spark of her old self flicker back to life. It was enough. A week after the show closed, she told him she wanted a divorce. He was stunned, then enraged. He couldn't comprehend why she would choose to leave the perfect life he provided. The divorce was brutal. He fought her on every point, his high-priced lawyers attempting to paint her as unstable and ungrateful. He wanted to leave her with as little as possible, to force her to crawl back. But Mamia had an ace up her sleeve. The small painting he had bought from her all those years ago. In his arrogance, he'd let her keep her own pre-marital artworks. He didn't know that her mentor, the has-been, had quietly been buying her pieces under a pseudonym for years, believing in her talent. She sold them, securing enough capital to live modestly and rent the Bleecker Street studio while she rebuilt her career. Leaving the townhouse for the last time with only her personal belongings and her canvases was the most terrifying and liberating day of her life. Mark's parting words echoed in her ears. "You'll be back," he'd sneered. "You'll come crawling back when you realize the real world doesn't care about your little paintings." Now, standing in the studio he had just mocked, she thought about those words. He was wrong. The real world, it turned out, was just waiting to see what she could do. And one very important person in that world had not only cared about her paintings, he had seen his own soul reflected in them. 6 months into her new life, Mamia was a study in controlled chaos. Her days were a blur of cheap coffee, long hours, and the exhilarating freedom of creation. The Bleecker Street studio was her cocoon. She poured all the pain, the anger, and the nascent hope of her post-divorce life onto her canvases. Her style had evolved, becoming bolder, more abstract, infused with a raw emotion that had been suppressed for a decade. She was painting for herself, and her work had never been more honest. She supported herself with small commissions and online sales, enough to pay the rent and buy supplies. It was a world away from the limitless Amex card she'd once held, but it was hers. Every dollar was earned through her own talent and grit. The opportunity of a lifetime came via a simple email with a subject line that made her heart stop: commission inquiry, the Croft Foundation. Everyone knew the name Julian Croft. He was a titan of the tech industry, a self-made billionaire who had revolutionized sustainable energy. Unlike the old money establishment Mark revered, Croft was seen as a visionary, a futurist. He was also famously private, a stark contrast to Mark's relentless social climbing. His philanthropic arm, the Croft Foundation, was renowned for its massive investments in the arts and sciences. The email was from his foundation's art director, a woman named Anja Sharma. She had seen Mamia's work at that small East Village gallery show, the very show that had ended her marriage. Anja had been tracking her progress online ever since. The foundation was looking for a single artist to create a massive multi-panel installation for the triple-height lobby of their new global headquarters, a stunning architectural marvel on the Hudson Yards skyline called the Orion Tower. They wanted a statement piece that represented renewal, innovation, and the power of human connection. They wanted her. The meeting was held not in a stuffy boardroom, but in Mamia's own studio. Anya arrived first, a chic, intelligent woman who spoke of Mamia's work with a reverence that made her blush. Then 5 minutes later, Julian Croft himself walked through the door. He was nothing like she expected. There was no entourage, no air of arrogance. He was tall and dressed in a simple grey sweater and dark jeans, but he possessed an aura of quiet, unshakable confidence. His eyes, a warm hazel, held a genuine curiosity as he looked around her studio, not with judgment, but with respect. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice deeper than she'd imagined. "Anja has been telling me for months that you are the only artist for this project. Seeing your work in person, I understand why." He didn't look at the second-hand furniture or the cramped space. He looked at the art. He walked from canvas to canvas, studying them intently. He asked about her technique, her choice of color, the meaning behind a particular brushstroke. He wasn't just being polite, he was genuinely engaged. He saw the story in her work. "There's a tension in your pieces," he said, standing before a canvas dominated by stormy grays, pierced by a single defiant slash of crimson. "It's like you're fighting your way out of something dark, but you're certain the light is there." Mamia felt a lump form in her throat. "That's exactly it," she managed to say. In that moment, she felt more seen than she had in 10 years of marriage. The commission was hers. The budget was staggering, beyond anything she had ever dreamed. It afforded her the best materials, financial security, and most importantly, the validation of her life's work on a global stage. Over the next few months, Julian became a regular visitor to the studio. He'd stop by after work sometimes with Anya, sometimes alone, to see the progress of the 12 massive panels. Their conversations drifted from art to technology to philosophy to their pasts. He spoke of his own humble beginnings, the son of a librarian and a teacher, and the relentless drive it took to build his empire. He was fascinated by her creative process, seeing parallels in the way a painter builds layers on a canvas and the way a coder builds a complex algorithm. He valued the very things Mark had belittled. Her passion wasn't a hobby, it was a superpower. Her independence wasn't selfishness, it was strength. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, he found her staring at a finished panel, looking exhausted but triumphant. "It's done," she said quietly, "the last one." He stood beside her, looking at the breathtaking collection of art that would soon stun thousands of visitors a day. "It's a masterpiece, Mamia." He then turned to her, his expression serious. "This project is coming to an end. I find I'm not happy about that." Her heart beat a little faster. "Me neither. I'm not just talking about the art," he said softly. "I'm talking about our conversations. I'm talking about you." He was direct, honest, with no games or pretense. He told her he was captivated by her resilience, her talent, and the quiet fire he saw in her. He hadn't felt such a connection in years. When he asked if he could take her to dinner not as a patron, but as a man interested in a woman, She said yes, without hesitation. Their relationship blossomed away from the public eye. It was a courtship of equals. They found solace in each other's company, two people who had built their own worlds, and now found they wanted to share them. He loved the Bleecker Street studio, calling it her creation chamber. He never once suggested she change or give it up. He proposed 3 months later on a private trip to the Amalfi Coast on a balcony overlooking the sea at sunset. The ring wasn't a gaudy rock meant to signal ownership, but an elegant custom-designed piece with a rare sea-green sapphire that matched her eyes. "I don't want to change you, Mamia," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want to be the one who gets to watch you conquer the world." When they returned to New York, he showed her the apartment he'd bought. It was the Celestial Suite, the sprawling duplex penthouse at the top of the Orion Tower, the very building where her art would be displayed in the lobby. It was a palace in the sky with panoramic views of the entire city, a private terrace, and most importantly, a massive glass-walled room with a soaring ceiling and perfect northern light. "Your new studio," he'd said, squeezing her hand, "with a better view than a brick wall." She had cried, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of his love and respect. This was not a cage. It was a launch pad. Mark's world and Julian's world were about to collide, and Mamia found herself at the epicenter, holding all the power. The stage was being set for a final karmic showdown. Why keep the Bleecker Street studio? Why allow Mark to walk in and mock her perceived failure? It wasn't a game, and it wasn't out of sentimentality. It was a calculated legal strategy advised by a team of lawyers far more formidable than the ones Mark had used against her. The loose end that had brought Mark to her door was a lingering tax liability from a failed real estate venture he had started during their marriage. He had, without her full understanding, made her a minority partner in the LLC. When the venture collapsed, he'd used slick accounting to shift most of the losses and subsequent tax burdens in a way that could legally ensnare her. His goal during the divorce was to use this as leverage to threaten her with a massive IRS debt, unless she agreed to a pittance of a settlement. Mamia, Schwann's divorce lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Susan, had called it financial abuse, pure and simple. They had fought it, but the legal complexities meant a final resolution was still pending. After Mamia secured the Croft Commission, Susan's advice was unequivocal. Do not change your lifestyle. Not yet. Mark is watching you. He follows you on social media. He has friends who report back to him. He believes you are struggling. Let him believe it. His entire case against you is predicated on the idea that you have no resources. The moment he finds out you're connected to Julian Croft, his strategy will change. He'll try to argue that you had this relationship before the divorce was final to get a bigger settlement. He'll get nastier. Let's starve the beast. We wait for him to make his final move based on the false information he has. So Mamia maintained her quiet life. She and Julian were masters of discretion. They dined in private rooms, traveled on his personal jet, and spent their time together either at his heavily secured estate outside the city or within the magnificent but still undecorated penthouse. To the outside world, she was still Mamia Vance, the struggling artist in a fourth-floor walk-up. The Bleecker Street studio became a strategic asset, a stage for the final act. Julian, to his immense credit, understood completely. He found a certain satisfaction in the plan. He's a bully who relies on the perception of power, Julian had said one evening as they looked over legal documents in his vast library. All we're doing is letting him walk into a room where he thinks he's the giant, without realizing the floor is about to give way. Mark's visit was the move they had been waiting for. The signing of those documents was the final piece of the puzzle. His condescending offer of severance pay was the cherry on top, a perfect testament to his arrogance, something Susan would be delighted to hear about. The day after Mark's visit, Mamia met with Susan. He took the bait, Mamia said, recounting the entire conversation, including his pitying remarks and offer of cash. Susan grinned, a shark's smile. Perfect. We have his signed affidavit from the divorce proceedings stating you have no significant career prospects. And now we have a fresh, unsolicited visit where he confirms his belief in your financial destitution. His lawyers are about to file a final motion to assign the full tax debt to you. They're walking right into the trap. The plan was simple. Mark's lawyers would file the motion. Susan's team would respond not just with a refusal, but with a comprehensive dossier detailing Mamia's new financial reality, the contract for the Croft Commission, the sale of her previous works, and a sworn statement from the Croft Foundation's CFO. They would simultaneously file a countersuit against Mark for fraudulent misrepresentation and financial abuse during the marriage seeking damages. He thinks he's cornering a mouse, Susan said, tapping a pen on the thick folder containing Mamia's case. He's about to find out he's been cornering a lioness, and her mate owns the whole damn jungle. The deception, however, was taking a toll on Mamia. She hated the secrecy. She wanted to shout her happiness from the rooftops. She wanted to post a picture of her and Julian, their faces bright with love, just to wipe the smug look off Mark's face. Julian sensed her fatigue. That evening in the penthouse, he had a surprise for her. He led her into the room designated as her new studio. In the center of the vast space on a professional easel was a small, framed painting. It was the moody landscape of the Rhode Island coast, the first painting he had ever bought from her. Mamia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. How? I tracked down the broker he sold it to a few years ago, Julian explained softly. Mark unloaded it as part of a package of unwanted assets when he redecorated the townhouse. He probably got a few $100s for it. I believe it belongs here. A reminder of where you started and the talent that was always there, just waiting for the world to see it. Tears streamed down Mamia's face as she looked from the painting to the man who had brought it back to her. He hadn't just given her a future. He was helping her reclaim her past. He thought it was worthless, she whispered. He was wrong about a lot of things, Julian said, wrapping his arms around her, and he's about to get a masterclass in just how wrong he was. The conversation then shifted. Are you ready for this to be over? Julian asked. More than anything. Then let's finish it, he said. Susan has everything she needs. But I think there's one more thing we need to do. He came to your space to humiliate you. It seems only fair that the final blow is delivered on your home turf. A plan began to form. A final dramatic confrontation to be staged right back where it all started, in the simple apartment on Bleecker Street. The next 2 weeks were the calm before the storm. Mamia's legal team, led by the formidable Susan, prepared their bombshell response. Julian's team quietly provided supporting documentation that was ironclad. Meanwhile, Mark, oblivious, was pressing his advantage. He began with an email dripping with false sympathy. Subject, thinking of you, Mamia. I can't stop thinking about our conversation. Seeing you in that tiny apartment, it genuinely concerns me. I know you're proud, but pride doesn't pay the bills. The matter of the outstanding tax liability from the Northwood property deal needs to be settled. My lawyers are advising me that given your current financial situation, the courts will likely see it as my burden to bear, but it will be a long and messy fight that will just cost us both more money. I have a proposal. I will assume the full debt. No strings attached. All I ask is that you sign a final waiver acknowledging that this settles all financial matters between us, past, present, and future. It's the clean break we should have had. Let me do this one last thing for you. Think of it as a final act of kindness. Mamia read the email aloud to Julian and Susan over a conference call. Susan let out a dry laugh. An act of kindness. He's trying to get you to sign away your rights to sue him for a pittance. He's terrified that even if you're broke, some pro bono lawyer might take your case and uncover his fraud. He wants to lock you in a box and throw away the key. Julian's voice was cold. He's trying to buy a clear conscience for the price of a tax burden he created. It's pathetic. What's our next move? Mamia asked. We let him simmer, Susan advised. Don't respond. Your silence will make him nervous. He'll get sloppy. He'll push harder. Susan was right. A week of silence passed. Then came the official letter from Mark's lawyers. It was aggressive, demanding, and set a deadline. It threatened immediate legal action to assign the full debt to her, citing her lack of cooperation and unstable financial footing. This was the official move they had been waiting for. Susan's team immediately filed their countermotion. The legal gears were now turning, but the paperwork would take a few days to reach Mark's lawyers. That gave them a small window. The final piece of the plan fell into place when Mark, agitated by Mamia's silence and confident in his legal position, made one last arrogant move. He sent a text message directly to Mamia, his phone. Mark, I'm trying to help you, Mamia. I've sent a final offer via my lawyers. If you don't sign it, I'll have no choice but to let them do their job. I'm coming by your studio tomorrow at 3 p.m. with a courier. You can sign it right there, and this can all be over. Don't be foolish. Mamia's hands trembled slightly as she read it. This was it. The confrontation he was forcing was the very one she and Julian had planned. He's delivering his own execution order, Julian said grimly when she told him. Are you sure you're ready for this face-to-face? Mamia took a deep breath, her gaze falling on the small Rhode Island painting, now hanging in her magnificent new studio. She thought of the years of being made to feel small, of her dreams being dismissed as hobbies. I'm ready, she said, her voice filled with a steely resolve. He deserves to see my face when his world comes crashing down. The plan was set. Julian would not be there initially. This had to be her victory. He would arrive only at the very end to serve as a witness and to escort her away from the wreckage of her past life for good. The day of the meeting, Mamia dressed with purpose. She didn't wear a power suit or designer clothes. She wore her paint-splattered jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and her favorite worn leather boots. She was the artist he had tried to erase in the very studio he despised. At 2:45 p.m., she sat on the second-hand velvet couch, the room neat but still smelling of turpentine, the scent of her freedom. The air was thick with anticipation. She wasn't nervous. She was a conductor, waiting to bring the symphony of consequences to its crashing crescendo. At 2:55 p.m., she received a text from Julian. JC, I'm 5 minutes away. The documents were officially filed with the court and served to his lead counsel's office at 2:30 p.m. He doesn't know it yet, but he's already lost. This is just the epilogue. I love you. Mamia, I love you too. Showtime. Right on cue, at 3 p.m. sharp, she heard the heavy, confident footsteps on the stairs. They were followed by a lighter clicking sound. High heels. He had brought company. The audacity of it was breathtaking. The knock on the door was sharp, impatient. Mamia stood up, smoothed down her t-shirt, and walked to the door. She turned the knob, her heart steady, her mind clear. It was time to let the ghost of her past in for the very last time. The door swung open to reveal Mark Sterling in all his bespoke suited glory. Beside him, clinging to his arm, was a stunningly beautiful young woman with impossibly long blonde hair and a Chanel bag. Tiffany, the Instagram model, in the flesh. She looked at Mamia, then around the small apartment, and her perfectly glossed lips curled into a barely concealed sneer. Mamia Mark began his tone magnanimous, as if he were a king visiting a peasant's hovel. "This is Tiffany. I thought it best to have a witness, and this is the courier with the settlement papers." He gestured to a nervous-looking man in a uniform standing a step behind them. "Come in," Mamia said, her voice betraying nothing. She stepped back, allowing them to enter her space. The room suddenly felt very small, crowded with Mark's ego and the scent of Tiffany's expensive perfume. Mark placed his briefcase on the small coffee table with a decisive thud. "Let's make this quick. I have a reservation at Per Se." He looked at Tiffany with a smug smile. "Tiffany has never been. It's like impossible to get a table." Tiffany added, her voice a high-pitched drawl. She looked at a small, abstract painting on the wall. "Wow, my little nephew paints things like that at his daycare. So cute." Mamia ignored her. Her focus was entirely on Mark. "Here it is," Mark said, pulling out a thick document. "Simple, straightforward. You sign here, acknowledging you have no further claims. I sign here, taking on the full Northwood tax debt. The courier notarizes it, and we are done." "I'm being incredibly generous, Mamia. My lawyers think I'm insane." He slid the document across the table towards her. "Don't overthink it. It's the best deal you're ever going to get. It's your lifeline." Mamia did not look at the papers. She looked directly into Mark's eyes. "Generous, Mark. Is that what you call saddling your ex-wife with a debt you fraudulently created, then offering to take it back in exchange for immunity?" Mark's smile faltered for a second. "Let's not get into semantics. This is a simple business transaction." "No, let's," Mamia said, her voice rising in strength. "Let's talk about the hobby, my art. You called it a delusional pipe dream. You said I'd come crawling back. You stood in this very room and laughed at my cozy little life." "I was trying to be realistic," he said, growing defensive. "No, you were being cruel," she shot back. "And you were being blind. You've always been blind, Mark. You see price tags, but you have no concept of value." Tiffany looked nervously between them. "Mark, maybe we should just go." "Stay," Mamia commanded, her gaze not leaving Mark. She should hear this. Mark let out an exasperated sigh. "What is the point of this, Mamia? Are you going to throw a tantrum? Refuse to sign? Who do you think that hurts? It only hurts you. You have nothing. No assets, no income to speak of. Any court in the country will side with me. Now sign the paper." This was the moment, the peak of his arrogance, the final damning statement. Mamia smiled a slow, brilliant smile that did not reach her eyes. "It's funny you should mention courts, Mark." She pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. She tapped the screen. A voice deep and clear filled the small apartment. It was Julian's voice on a speakerphone call she had just answered. "Hi, honey," the voice said. "Just wanted to let you know I'm downstairs. Also, Anya just called. The lighting test for your installation in the lobby was a success. It looks magnificent." and the final payment from the foundation, the seven-figure one, should be hitting your account tomorrow." Mark froze. His face went pale. He stared at the phone as if it were a snake. Tiffany's jaw dropped. Who is that?" Mark stammered. Mamia's smile widened. "Also, Mark, on the subject of lawyers. Mine, a woman named Susan Lowell from Wachtell, Lipton. You may have heard of them. They're a step up from your guys. Filed a counter motion this afternoon. It details my income from the Croft Foundation Commission for the past 6 months. It also includes a motion to sue you for financial abuse and fraud. I imagine your lawyer's email is pinging right about now." Mark looked utterly bewildered. "Croft, the Julian Croft. What are you talking about?" As if on cue, there was a knock on the open door. Julian Croft stepped inside. He was not dressed for per se. He was in a casual but impeccably tailored jacket, and his eyes were fixed on Mark with an expression of cold fury. The courier's eyes went wide. Tiffany let out a small gasp, instantly recognizing the famous billionaire. Mark stared, his mind visibly short-circuiting as he connected the dots. The voice on the phone, the man in the doorway, the Croft Foundation, the Orion Tower, his firm's biggest lost bid. "You," he whispered, looking at Mamia with dawning horror. Julian walked calmly into the room and stood beside Mamia, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. He looked down at Mark, who was still seated, looking suddenly small and insignificant. "Sterling Julian," said his voice, dangerously quiet. "You came into my fiancé's studio to intimidate her. You mocked her life's work. That work now adorns the lobby of my global headquarters. You tried to saddle her with a fraudulent debt. My legal team, the best in the world, is going to dismantle you for that, not just for the fraud, but for the harassment." Julian then glanced at the settlement papers on the table. He picked them up, not even reading them, and tore the thick document in half with one clean rip. He dropped the pieces on the floor at Mark's feet. "This negotiation is over," Julian stated. Mark was speechless. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. His entire world, built on a foundation of perceived superiority, had just been leveled by a quiet woman in paint-stained jeans and the one man in New York he could never compete with. Tiffany began backing away towards the door, her face a mixture of terror and awe. I should go. I'll get an Uber." She practically fled, leaving Mark alone in the ruins. Mamia looked at her ex-husband, not with hate, but with a strange, detached pity. He wasn't a monster. He was just a hollow man. "The view from my new studio is much better than the one from the townhouse, Mark," she said softly. "You can see the whole city. You look so small from up there." She then turned, took Julian's hand, and walked out of the Bleecker Street studio for the last time, not looking back. She left Mark sitting there, amidst the torn papers of his generous offer, the ghost of his own success, haunting the tiny room he had so thoroughly misjudged. The aftermath was not swift, but it was total. Mark Sterling's world did not just crack, it atomized. The lawsuit Mamia filed was a masterpiece of legal devastation. Susan Lowell and Julian's in-house counsel worked in tandem, unearthing every shady deal, every shell corporation, every instance where Mark had leveraged Mamia's name and credit without her full consent. The Northwood tax fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a public trial against a beloved billionaire, and his artist fiancé Mark's lawyers advised him to settle. He was financially obliterated. He had to sell the Upper East Side townhouse to cover the legal fees and the massive settlement he paid to Mamia a settlement she immediately donated in its entirety to a charity supporting female artists. He lost his Porsche, his memberships to exclusive clubs, and his standing in the real estate community. News of his fraudulent dealings and his humiliating divorce spread like wildfire through the circles he had fought so hard to dominate. He was no longer a player. He was a cautionary tale. The final blow came when his firm, seeking to distance themselves from the scandal, terminated his partnership. Tiffany, of course, was long gone, her social media feed quickly pivoting from shots with Mark to vague, inspirational quotes about cutting out negative energy. Mark Sterling, the man who had defined himself by success, was left with nothing but the truth of his own character. Mamia never saw him again. She didn't need to. Her focus was entirely on the future, a future that was brighter than she could have ever imagined. 6 months after that final confrontation, the Orion Tower held its grand opening gala. The event was the talk of New York. At the heart of the soaring cathedral-like lobby was Mamia's installation. The 12 massive panels were a symphony of color and emotion alive under the carefully designed lights. They were universally acclaimed. The New York Times called the installation a monumental work of breathtaking power and optimism, and hailed Mamia Vance as a major new voice in American art. That night, Mamia stood on a balcony high up in the tower, looking down at the glittering city. She wore a stunning sea-green gown that matched her engagement ring, and Julian was by her side, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. They weren't looking at the partygoers or the press. They were looking at the art. Her art. "Do you remember what you told me the first time you came to my studio?" Mamia asked him, her voice soft over the distant murmur of the crowd. "You said my work looked like I was fighting my way out of the dark, certain the light was there." I remember Julian said, his eyes full of love. "And look at you now. You're not just in the light, you're creating it." She leaned her head on his shoulder, a feeling of profound peace settling over her. Her happiness wasn't about the money or the fame. It wasn't even about Mark's downfall. It was about this. It was about being seen, being valued, and being loved for exactly who she was. The penthouse, the acclaim, the security, they weren't the prize. They were the wonderful, beautiful byproducts of her reclaiming her own soul. Mark had tried to put her in a gilded cage, and she had built a palace in the sky instead. He had laughed at her simple apartment, unaware that from her new home she had a view of the entire world, a world she was ready to paint in every color imaginable. She was no longer Mamia Sterling, the accessory, or Mamia Vance, the struggling artist. She was Mamia Vance, the woman who had learned that true wealth was not something you could own, but something you had to become. And from up here, the view was perfect. And so Mamia's story isn't just about getting revenge. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest success is living authentically. Mark saw her life through the lens of money and status, and it made him blind. Julian saw her through the lens of passion and character, and it showed him everything. In the end, the simple apartment Mark mocked was the very place Mamia forged the weapons of her victory, her art, and her self-worth. She didn't need to tear him down. His own arrogance did the work for her. She just had to rise. What did you think of Mamia's ultimate comeback? Have you ever seen karma play out so perfectly in real life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were moved by this story of empowerment and justice, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss our next real-life drama.